She had just destroyed the men who tried to steal everything she built, and it nearly destroyed her in the process. Vanessa Sterling stood alone in the ruins of her own victory, 30 years old, worth more than most countries' GDP, and completely hollowed out. She had won. The investors were exposed, the board was cleaned out, the headlines declared her a titan. But when the conference room finally emptied and the cameras went dark, she sat down on the floor of her corner office, still in her blazer, still in her heels, and couldn't think of a single person to call. That's the moment this story really begins. Jan, if you're watching this for the first time, welcome. Hit that subscribe button right now because we release new stories every week and you do not want to miss what's coming. Drop a like if you're already hooked and tell me in the comments what city and country you're watching from. I read every single one, and it blows my mind how far these stories travel. Now settle in. This one's going to take a while, and it's worth every minute. The morning Vanessa Sterling left New York, she didn't tell anyone. She didn't hold a press conference, didn't post anything, didn't even send a message to her assistant. She just packed 2 bags, one with clothes, one with nothing but a laptop and a stack of paperback novels she'd been meaning to read for 3 years, and walked out of the penthouse on the 54th floor of a building that had her name on it. Her driver was waiting in the garage. He'd worked for her for 6 years and knew better than to ask questions when she had that particular look on her face. "Where to, Ms. Sterling?" "Somewhere that doesn't have a Bloomberg terminal." He'd blinked at that. "I'm going to need a little more to go on." She'd almost smiled. "North. Just drive north, and I'll tell you when it feels right." It took 4 hours and 11 minutes before she said, "Stop." The town of Harlow's Cove sat at the edge of a lake that didn't appear on any travel magazine's list of must-visit destinations. That was probably why Vanessa liked it immediately. The main road through town had a diner, a hardware store, a small library, and a bar that closed at 9 on weeknights. The lake itself was wide and dark, and so quiet in the morning that you could hear birds she didn't have names for. She rented a house on the water through a property management company and paid 3 months up front without negotiating. The property manager, a heavy-set woman named Donna who wore a fleece vest in all seasons, had looked at Vanessa's wire transfer confirmation with an expression of muted suspicion. "You're not running from anything, are you?" Donna had asked. "Not anymore," Vanessa said, and that was the closest she came to explaining herself. The house was older than it looked in the listing photos. The back porch had a warped board that caught her heel every time she stepped outside. The kitchen faucet ran cold for 45 seconds before the hot water arrived. The Wi-Fi was just fast enough to be functional and just slow enough to discourage the kind of obsessive screen checking she'd built her entire adult life around. She loved it. For the first 2 weeks, she did almost nothing. She read 3 of the paperbacks. She cooked badly, mostly eggs and toast and canned soup. She walked the lake path in the mornings until her feet hurt, then sat on the warped porch in the afternoons with a coffee that went cold while she watched the water. Her phone buzzed constantly. Her COO, her legal team, 2 journalists, her mother twice, and she answered almost none of it, just enough to confirm she was alive and not being held against her will. It was the most bored she'd been since she was 8 years old, and she was shocked to find out how much she needed it. She noticed the house next door on her 3rd day, but she didn't notice the people in it until the end of her first week. The property was modest, a 2-story with blue shutters and a vegetable garden that ran along the side fence in neat rows. Whoever tended it took the work seriously. Tomatoes, squash, what looked like beans climbing a trellis made from salvaged wood and twine. It wasn't pretty in a catalog way. It was the kind of garden that existed because someone actually wanted the vegetables. She heard the little girl before she saw her. High, clear laughter coming from the backyard, the kind that doesn't have any self-consciousness in it yet. Then a man's voice, low and even, saying something Vanessa couldn't make out through the fence. Then the laughter again. She didn't go out of her way to meet them. She wasn't in Harlow's Cove to meet people. But the lake path ran behind both properties, and on the 8th morning she walked out early and found a man crouched at the water's edge, looking at something in the reeds. He was maybe 6 feet tall, built in a way that was functional rather than decorative, broad shoulders, no wasted motion when he moved. He had dark hair going a little gray at the temples, and the kind of face that had spent real time outdoors, not tanned for aesthetics, just weathered. He looked up when he heard her footsteps on the gravel path. "Morning," he said. Simple, not overly friendly, not standoffish. "Morning," she said back. He turned back to the reeds. She kept walking. That was it. She didn't think about it again until the following day when she found him fixing the section of fence between their two properties with a level and a cordless drill. "Yours was leaning," he said before she could ask. "Bothered me every time I looked at it." She stopped. "You're fixing my fence." "Mm-hmm. I didn't ask you to do that." He glanced over his shoulder, not annoyed, not apologetic. "No, you didn't." She should have been irritated. She was 30 years old, she ran a company with 9,000 employees, and she did not need a neighbor she'd never spoken to deciding her fence was his problem. But something in the straightforward simplicity of it, the complete absence of performance, no angling for gratitude or recognition, made the irritation stall out before it arrived. "You live next door," she said. "Ryan Carter," he said, and went back to drilling. "Vanessa Sterling." He didn't react to the name. Either he didn't know it or he knew it and didn't care. Both options felt in that moment like something close to a gift. "There's a board on your back porch that's going to snap eventually," he said, the third one from the door. "I know, I keep catching my heel on it. Takes about 10 minutes to fix if you've got the right tools." She didn't say anything. "I've got the right tools," he said. She stood there for a moment watching him work. Level, adjust, drill, check. Steady and methodical in a way that looked like habit rather than effort. "Fine," she said. He fixed the porch board that afternoon. She made coffee and set a mug on the railing without asking if he wanted any. He drank it without commenting on whether it was good. That was how they started. Sant. The little girl's name was Lily. She was 8 years old and had her father's dark hair and eyes that took in everything around her with quiet, assessing intelligence before she decided how to react. She was the kind of child who didn't perform for adults. She watched them first, made up her mind, and then either engaged or didn't. She reminded Vanessa uncomfortably of herself at that age. Lily had introduced herself over the fence on Vanessa's 11th day in Harlow's Cove, holding a zucchini with both hands. "Dad said we had too many of these and asked if you wanted one." Vanessa looked at the zucchini. "What do I do with it?" Lily's expression shifted slightly, recalibrating. "You cook it." "Right. How?" "You don't know how to cook zucchini?" "I know how to order zucchini. That's different." Lily seemed to find this genuinely puzzling. She turned toward the house and yelled, "Dad, she doesn't know how to cook zucchini." Ryan appeared in the garden doorway with a dish towel over one shoulder. He looked at Vanessa over the fence with an expression that was very carefully neutral. "I can cook it," Vanessa said. "I'm just not sure." "Olive oil, salt, cast iron pan," Lily said. "Medium-high heat. Donut crowd the slices." Vanessa looked at the 8-year-old. "How do you know that?" "Dad taught me." She passed the zucchini over the fence. "Don't crowd the slices. That's the important part." Vanessa took the vegetable and went inside and crowded the slices. It still tasted fine. But she didn't tell Lily that. The evenings in Harlow's Cove settled early. By 7, the light over the lake went amber, and the temperature dropped enough to need a second layer, and the silence that moved in was the kind that felt earned rather than empty. She'd started leaving the back door open in the evenings, not for any particular reason, just because the air came in off the water and smelled like something she didn't have a word for. Lake water and pine and cooling earth, and it was better than climate control. She could hear the Carter's kitchen from her porch. Nothing specific, just the sounds of a household in motion. Cabinet doors, a drawer, Lily's voice asking questions and Ryan's voice answering them. The rhythm of it. She hadn't lived next door to anything like that since before she'd gone to college, and then to New York, and then to the relentless pressure of building something from the ground up with nothing but borrowed money and a refusal to fail. She sat on the porch with her coffee one evening and listened without meaning to, and something she hadn't known was clenched, loosened slightly. She didn't examine it, she just sat with it. Ryan Carter did not talk about himself the way people usually did when they met someone new. He didn't offer his biography. He didn't explain his situation or fill silences with the particular brand of self-promotional conversation Vanessa had spent a decade swimming through in business. He said what was necessary and stopped. She found out he was a single father because Lily mentioned her mother once, briefly, in the context of something entirely unrelated. Mom used to make that, about a specific kind of sandwich. And then moved on, and Ryan's face had done something complicated for about 2 seconds before going still again. And Vanessa had understood from the economy of it that this was not a thing they discussed casually. She found out he'd been in the military because she asked him, directly, why he moved the way he did. "What do you mean?" he said. "You move like someone who's spent a lot of time in situations where moving wrong had consequences." He'd been quiet for a moment. "Navy. Long time ago." "What kind of Navy?" Another beat. "SEAL." She'd waited to see if more would come. It didn't. "Okay," she said, and went back to her book. And he went back to whatever he was doing with the fence post, and she noticed something that had become familiar by then, the slight loosening across his shoulders when she didn't push. She understood that too. She'd spent years in rooms full of people who pushed. There were things about the weeks in Harlow's Cove that she didn't expect. She didn't expect to start reading the labels on vegetables at Donna's small grocery before buying them. She didn't expect to care about whether the tomatoes were from the farm 2 miles outside town or trucked in from a warehouse somewhere. She didn't expect Lily to knock on her door one Saturday morning with flour on her shirt and an expression of mild crisis and say, "We're out of vanilla, and Dad says you might have some." And for Vanessa to spend 20 minutes looking through her cabinets before finding an unopened bottle she'd bought on impulse and never used, and for the satisfaction of producing it to feel, briefly, like closing a deal. She didn't expect Ryan to show up on her porch one evening with 2 plates of food and say, simply, "Lily made too much pasta," and hand her one without ceremony or explanation. She didn't expect to eat it standing on her porch while he sat on the steps and they watched the lake and said almost nothing for an hour, and for it to be the least lonely she'd felt in longer than she wanted to admit. "You seem like someone who's been running a long time," he said at some point. Not accusatory, just observational. She looked at the water. "I have been." "What from?" "Nothing, eventually," she said. "Once you've been doing it long enough, you're just running." He was quiet for a while. "Yeah," he said finally. "I know what that's like." She believed him. She glanced over at him, the way he sat, elbows on his knees, looking at the same dark water she was looking at. And she thought about the things she didn't know about him, the things behind the steady voice and the methodical hands and the way he made sure his daughter ate dinner every night at the same time, same table, same ritual, like the consistency itself was a form of protection. She didn't ask, but she thought about it. And she sat on her porch in the amber evening and ate pasta that an 8-year-old had made and listened to the lake and felt, for the first time in a very long time, like she was somewhere she was supposed to be. She couldn't have told you why. She wasn't sure it mattered. What mattered was that when she went inside that night, she slept without waking. The thing about small towns was that they didn't let you stay invisible forever. Vanessa had managed about 3 weeks of genuine anonymity before Donna from the property management office mentioned to someone at the diner that the woman renting the Callaway house was some kind of businesswoman from New York. And from that point forward, there were occasional glances in the grocery store, and one deeply uncomfortable moment at the library when a teenager recognized her from a magazine cover and took a photo without asking. She didn't make a scene about it. She just left, walked the lake path home, and spent the next hour on the porch reminding herself why she'd come here in the first place. What surprised her was that Ryan never brought it up. She was certain he'd looked her up at some point. Anyone would have. Vanessa Sterling wasn't famous the way celebrities were famous, but she was well known enough. Youngest woman to take a company public on the NASDAQ 2 years running, the hostile takeover story had made the front page of the Journal. There'd been a profile in a magazine she wished had never happened. He had a phone. He had internet access that was, admittedly, not great, but functional. And yet he treated her exactly the same way he had on day one. Fence repair and pasta and minimal conversation, like her name was just a name. She tested it once, obliquely, about a month in. You know what I do, she said. They were on her porch again. Lily was inside doing homework, the arrangement having evolved naturally over the previous 2 weeks into something where the kitchen table in Vanessa's house had become an acceptable homework location because it was quieter than next door, and Vanessa, unlike Ryan, had a printer. Run a company, he said. A large company. Mm-hmm. Worth approximately? I know what it's worth, he said, not cutting her off, just stating a fact. I looked you up. And? He considered this for a moment. And what? Does it change anything? He looked at her the way he sometimes did, that brief, assessing look that she'd started to recognize as his version of taking something seriously. Why would it? She didn't have a good answer to that. The honest answer was that it changed everything, always, with everyone. The way people talked to her, what they wanted from her, what they thought she owed them, or what they thought she should be grateful for. Wealth at that scale warped relationships the way a heavy object warped the space around it. She'd stopped having friends who didn't know what she was worth before she turned 25 because once they found out, the friendship became something else. It just usually does, she said. He shrugged one shoulder. I spent 12 years with guys who'd done things that would make your career look like a slow Tuesday. None of us introduced ourselves with our resumes. She was quiet for a moment. That's not a perfect analogy. No, he agreed, but it's the one I've got. She let it go, but she held on to it somewhere. October arrived and the lake turned a different color, less blue, more gray-green, like the water was getting ready for something. The leaves on the trees around the property went through their whole performance, orange and red and yellow, and Vanessa found herself actually noticing it, which was not something she'd done with any real attention since she was a child. Lily had started treating Vanessa's house as an extension of her own in ways that were gradual enough that Vanessa hadn't noticed until the fact was already established. The homework sessions had expanded into occasional dinners when Ryan was working late. He did some kind of private consulting work that required phone calls at unpredictable hours, and occasional day trips she didn't ask about. Lily had appropriated a specific mug from Vanessa's cabinet for her hot chocolate and referred to it as my mug, without any apparent awareness that this was a claim being staked. One Thursday evening, Vanessa was on a call with her COO, her first substantive work call in 6 weeks, unavoidable, something about a contract dispute that needed her direct input, and Lily was at the kitchen table with a math worksheet and a look of concentrated suffering. Vanessa wrapped the call up in 32 minutes, which was faster than she'd done anything business-related since leaving New York, and sat down across from Lily. How bad is it? Lily slid the worksheet across the table without comment. Vanessa looked at it. Fractions. What specifically is the problem? The denominators are different, and I don't understand why that's my problem. Vanessa almost laughed. It came out as a short exhale. Show me where you got stuck. They spent 40 minutes on fractions. Vanessa was, by her own assessment, not a natural teacher. She moved too fast, assumed too much, had to back up twice when she realized she'd lost Lily entirely. But Lily was the kind of student who didn't pretend to understand when she didn't, which was a quality Vanessa respected enormously, so they fumbled through it together and eventually got somewhere. You're better at business than math tutoring, Lily said when they were done. I'm aware. But you didn't give up. Neither did you. Lily considered this with the gravity that 8-year-olds brought to statements they found genuinely interesting. Dad says the giving up feeling is just your brain trying to protect you. You have to tell your brain you don't need protecting. Vanessa looked at the girl across the table. Your dad says that? When I want to quit something hard. She gathered up her worksheets. Does it work for you? Business stuff? More or less, Vanessa said. The brain doesn't always listen. No, Lily agreed very seriously. It doesn't. She called her COO back that night after Lily had gone home and for the first time in 6 weeks felt something close to equanimity about the state of things. The contract dispute was manageable. The board restructuring she'd begun before leaving New York was proceeding. Her legal team had finished the documentation on the investor exposure case, and it was moving through the appropriate channels without her direct involvement. The company didn't need her the way she'd always assumed it needed her. That should have been a relief. For a while, standing at the kitchen window with her phone pressed to her ear and the lake dark beyond the glass, it felt more like grief. She'd built Meridian Capital from an idea she'd had at 23, and a loan she'd spent the better part of 2 years paying back. It had been the thing she organized her life around for 7 years, getting out of bed for it, skipping meals for it, sacrificing relationships for it in ways she hadn't fully acknowledged until the relationships were already gone. And now it ran without her and the sky didn't fall. She wasn't sure what that said about her, or about it. "You still there?" her COO asked. "Yeah," she said. "Just thinking." "That's new." "Don't push it, Marcus." She heard him smile through the phone. "Take another month. We're fine." "I know you're fine," she said. "That's not—" She stopped. "Yeah, another month." She went next door for the first time in early November. It hadn't happened before by some unspoken mutual agreement that her house was the meeting point. Ryan came over to fix things, Lily came over for homework and hot chocolate and the use of the printer, but Vanessa had not crossed the fence line in the 8 weeks she'd been in Harlow's Cove. The occasion was a Thursday evening when Lily had mentioned at school, apparently, that Vanessa had helped her with the fraction worksheet, and the math teacher had sent home a note suggesting supplemental tutoring given Lily's particular learning style, which Ryan had decoded as a polite way of saying Lily needed more one-on-one time than classroom instruction provided. Ryan knocked on her door at 7:15 with the note in his hand and the expression of a man who was working out how to ask something he hadn't planned to ask. "I'm not a tutor," Vanessa said when he explained. "I know that. I also don't know if what I did last week was actually helpful or if she just got through it by willpower." "She got a 92 on the test yesterday." Vanessa stood in her doorway. "Oh." "So." He held the note slightly to the side like he was presenting evidence. "Whatever you did worked." She thought about it. In her experience, making quick decisions was almost always better than deliberating, because deliberation tended to locate reasons not to do things, and the reasons not to do things were rarely as important as they felt. "Fine. But I'm not doing worksheets more than twice a week. I have a company to ignore." He almost smiled. It happened quickly and was mostly in his eyes, but it was there. "Twice a week is fine. And I reserve the right to be bad at explaining things. Lily will tell you when you're losing her." "I know she will. That's why it works." She stepped back from the doorway. "You want coffee?" "I was about to make some." He looked briefly surprised, which was unusual. Ryan Carter's default expression was a settled neutrality that didn't surprise easily. "Sure." That was the first time she went to his house, because he held the door open and she followed him back across the yard in the November cold, and the kitchen smelled like whatever he'd cooked for dinner, something with garlic and onion that still hung in the air. And Lily was on the couch with a book and looked up with the particular expression of a child who had engineered a situation and was watching it unfold according to plan. "Hi, Vanessa," she said very casually. "Don't be smug," Vanessa said. Lily returned to her book. The kitchen was small and functional. Nothing matched, but everything had a place. There was a corkboard above the counter covered in Lily's school papers, and a calendar, and a photo she didn't look at too long. Ryan made coffee with the kind of cheap drip machine Vanessa hadn't used since college, and it was, she had to admit, perfectly fine. They sat at the kitchen table while Lily read in the other room, and they actually talked, the way they hadn't quite done before, with slightly more than the minimum, about nothing consequential. About the lake in winter, which Ryan said was worth staying for. About the hardware store owner, a man named Pete, who'd apparently tried to give Ryan unsolicited relationship advice 3 separate times since he'd moved to Harlow's Cove. About Lily's school, which was small and underfunded, and had a teacher who genuinely loved her students and made up for the rest. "Why here?" Vanessa asked eventually. "Why this town?" He turned the mug in his hands. It was a habit she'd noticed. He held things rather than just letting them sit. Quiet, safe, not too far from Portland if something comes up. He paused. Lily needed roots. We'd moved 3 times in 2 years, and she stopped unpacking her stuffed animals because she didn't see the point. Something shifted in Vanessa's chest without warning. She told you that? I found them in her bag, still packed, 8 months after we moved in here. He was looking at the table. So, here we are. She didn't say anything. There wasn't anything adequate to say. It's a good town, he said quieter. People mostly leave you alone, Pete notwithstanding. She laughed, short and genuine, and he glanced up at the sound of it like it was something unexpected. She stayed until 9. It was the latest she'd been out since arriving in Harlow's Cove, which she recognized as a low bar, and found that she didn't care. The call came on a Tuesday morning in late November when Vanessa was in the kitchen, attempting sourdough from a recipe Lily had found in a library book and printed at Vanessa's house, somewhat circularly, since Vanessa could have printed it herself, but Lily had wanted to be involved in the process. Ryan knocked on the back door, which he rarely did before 10. She looked at him through the glass before she opened it. Something was different. The settled neutrality she'd come to read as his baseline had shifted into something tighter. He was standing with his hands in his jacket pockets and his jaw set in a way she hadn't seen before. She opened the door. "I need to talk to you," he said. She stepped back. He came in, looked briefly at the sourdough disaster on her counter, and then looked at her in a direct, searching way that made her stand up straighter by reflex. "There's a situation overseas," he said. "I can't give you details. It's not something I can lay out fully. But I've been contacted about a security contractor role, the kind of thing where my background makes me specific to the job in a way that matters." She waited. "I would be gone for an indeterminate period. Minimum 6 weeks, realistically closer to 4 months. He paused. "I have no family. My parents are both dead. My sister lives in Arizona, and she and Lily have never been close. I have people I served with, but none of them are—" He stopped himself, started again. "I don't trust this to just anyone." The kitchen was very quiet. "I know this is an enormous thing to ask," he said. "I know we've known each other 2 months. I know you have a company and a life that is not here, and that this is—" He pressed his mouth together. "I'm asking anyway. Because Lily trusts you, and I trust Lily's read on people, and because you're the first person I've met in 3 years who treated her like a full human being instead of a complication." Vanessa had negotiated billion-dollar contracts. She had sat across tables from men who were trying to destroy everything she'd built and not let her hands shake. She was not, as a rule, a person who got ambushed by her own emotions. She felt ambushed. "You want me to take care of Lily," she said. "Yes. While you go somewhere you can't tell me about and do something you can't describe." "Yes. And you don't know for certain when you're coming back." "No," he said. "I don't." The sourdough starter was going to be ruined. She'd left it sitting too long and the temperature was wrong and it didn't matter at all. "What does Lily know?" she asked. "That I have to go away for work, that it's important. She's done this before. When I was still active, she knows how to hold it." His voice dropped slightly on the last sentence in a way that suggested he didn't entirely forgive himself for that. Vanessa looked at him for a long moment. He held the look without flinching, which she'd come to understand was his way. He didn't look away from hard things. He just went still and let you see that he wasn't. "I'm not a parent," she said. "I know. I don't know how to do most of what you do. The consistency, She'll tell you what she needs. She's good at that. A beat. Better than most adults." "That's true," Vanessa said, somewhat despite herself. She looked down at the counter, at the failed sourdough starter in its glass jar, and then back at him. "When do you leave?" she said. He exhaled, very slightly, barely visible, but she caught it. 4 days. 4 days, she repeated. "I know." She was quiet for a moment that stretched out long enough to be uncomfortable. "I'll do it." He nodded once. Something moved across his face that wasn't quite relief and wasn't quite gratitude. It was quieter than both and more private, and she looked away from it because it felt like something she shouldn't witness. "Thank you," he said. "Don't thank me yet," she said. "I killed a basil plant last month, and it's possible Lily is harder to keep alive than basil." He made a sound that might have been a laugh. "She's significantly more resilient than basil." "Good to know." Beat, he told Lily that evening at dinner, and Vanessa sat at the table because Ryan had asked her to be there, and she watched the little girl process the information in the way she did all difficult things. Very carefully, very quietly, with her eyes doing most of the work. "How long?" Lily asked. "A few months. I'll call when I can." "Okay?" She was looking at her plate. "And Vanessa's staying?" "She'll be next door. You'll go to school, do your homework, same routine." Ryan was calm, which Vanessa understood now was something he'd learned to be rather than something that came naturally. "Nothing changes except where I am." Lily looked up at Vanessa, the assessing look, longer than usual. "Do you know how to make lunches?" she asked. "I'm learning," Vanessa said. "Dad cuts the sandwiches diagonally." "I can do diagonal. And I don't like the crusts." "Lily," Ryan said. "It's relevant information," Lily said. Vanessa looked at the girl across the table, the careful eyes, the straight back, the hands folded in her lap in an unconscious imitation of her father, and felt something she didn't have language for, something that sat in her sternum and pressed. "No crusts," she said. "Diagonal cut. Anything else I should know?" Lily thought about it seriously. "I sometimes have nightmares. Dad comes and sits on the edge of the bed until I fall back asleep. You don't have to say anything. Just sitting there is enough." The table was very quiet. "Okay," Vanessa said. Her voice came out steadier than she felt. "I can do that." Ryan was looking at the wall just past her shoulder. Lily nodded and picked up her fork. "Also," Lily said more quietly, "I'm not going to cry in front of you when Dad leaves. I just want you to know that's not because I'm fine. I just do it in my room." "I know," Vanessa said. "That's okay." "Okay," Lily said, and went back to eating. Vanessa sat in the quiet kitchen of that small house with the mismatched furniture and the corkboard covered in school papers, and she thought about all the ways she was unqualified for what she'd just agreed to, all the things she didn't know and couldn't anticipate and had never prepared for, and she sat with all of that and didn't say a word about it. The day Ryan left, it was raining. He loaded a single duffel bag into the car with the efficiency of someone who had packed for this kind of departure many times before. Lily stood on the porch in her school uniform, dry under the overhang, watching him. He came up the steps and crouched down to her eye level and said something Vanessa couldn't hear. Lily listened. She nodded once. She put her arms around his neck and held on for a few seconds, then let go and stepped back and looked at him with the same clear, careful eyes she looked at everything with. "Come back," she said. "I will," he said. He stood up and looked at Vanessa over Lily's head. The look lasted maybe 3 seconds. She didn't know what was in it, and she suspected he didn't entirely know either. Then he picked up his bag, walked to the car, and drove away without looking back. Because looking back, Vanessa understood, was one of the things he'd trained himself not to do. She stood on the porch next to Lily in the rain until the car turned out of sight. Then she put a hand briefly on the girl's shoulder. "Diagonal sandwich today or straight cut?" she asked. Lily turned toward the door. "Diagonal," she said. "Obviously." "Right," said Vanessa. "Obviously." And they went inside. They went. The first week without Ryan was the hardest, and not for the reasons Vanessa had expected. She'd anticipated logistics, the school drop-off schedule, the lunch making, the homework supervision, the bedtime routine that Lily had described with the precision of someone who understood that routine was its own form of safety. Those were concrete problems with concrete solutions, and Vanessa was, whatever her other deficits, very good at concrete problems. What she hadn't anticipated was the silence in the house next door. She could see it from her kitchen window. The blue shutters, the garden gone dormant for winter. The porch light Ryan had set on a timer that clicked on every evening at 5:30, regardless of whether anyone was home. The house sat there and looked exactly like itself and managed, despite being an inanimate structure, to communicate absence with considerable force. Lily felt it too, though she didn't say so. She was too much her father's daughter to announce what she was feeling. Instead, it showed up in the small behavioral shifts that Vanessa had learned over 8 weeks of proximity to read. She ate slower. She asked more questions in the evening. Not about anything in particular, just questions, keeping the conversation going past the point where it would naturally end. She brought her stuffed animals out of her bag, Vanessa noticed, and arranged them on the shelf in the room she'd taken over in Vanessa's house, which was not a thing she commented on, but which felt significant. On the fourth night, at 2:15 in the morning, Vanessa heard it, the specific sound of someone awake who was trying not to be heard being awake. She lay in her own bed for a moment, staring at the ceiling, and then got up. Lily's door was partially open. She was sitting up in bed with her knees pulled to her chest, not crying, just sitting. And when Vanessa appeared in the doorway, she looked up with an expression that was mostly exhausted and slightly relieved. Vanessa didn't say anything. She crossed the room, sat on the edge of the bed the way Ryan had described, just sat there, no commentary, no reassurance, just presence. And after about 3 minutes, Lily uncurled herself and lay back down. Vanessa stayed until the breathing evened out. She went back to her own room and lay in the dark for a while, and she thought about the kind of person it took to raise a child like this, who understood at 8 years old that what she needed was someone to just sit with her, not fix it, not explain it, not make it better with words. Who had that kind of calm? Who had taught her daughter how to communicate her needs clearly without demanding more than she asked for? She thought about Ryan in whatever location she wasn't allowed to know about, doing whatever she wasn't allowed to know about, and she pressed her face into the pillow and was, briefly, more afraid for someone else than she'd been for herself in years. A routine established itself by the second week, the way routines do. Not designed but accumulated, each day adding a small deposit to the structure of the one before it until it was load-bearing. Vanessa's alarm went off at 6:15. She made coffee and started Lily's breakfast. Oatmeal on school days because Lily had announced that it kept her full longer, which Vanessa verified with approximately 40 minutes of research before she believed it. She woke Lily at 6:45. She made the sandwich while Lily got ready. Diagonal cut, no crusts, turkey and cheddar on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays, peanut butter on Tuesdays and Thursdays, no negotiation. She drove Lily to school at 7:50, which required her to actually put on clothes before 8 a.m., which had not been part of her Harlow's Cove practice, but which she adapted to with limited complaint. Then she came back to the house and opened her laptop and dealt with Meridian Capital for approximately 6 hours, which was more than she'd done since leaving New York and less than she'd done at any point in the previous 7 years. The company, it turned out, had not disintegrated in her absence. Marcus had managed the board efficiently. The legal team had moved the investor exposure case forward without her direct involvement. The day-to-day operations had continued operating, as operations tended to do, because she'd spent years building systems that didn't require her to personally hold every moving part. This was supposed to be the goal. She'd known it intellectually. Sitting at the kitchen table in a lake house in Maine while her company ran itself and she made sandwiches and supervised math homework, she understood it a little differently. She picked Lily up at 3:15. They ate something together at 4. Lily had opinions about afternoon snacks that were nearly as specific as her opinions about sandwiches. They did homework. They had dinner. Vanessa tried different things because she was constitutionally incapable of making the same meal more than twice in a row, which was a habit from a decade of restaurant meals and a conviction that repetition was for people who weren't paying attention. Lily was initially skeptical of this approach. "What is this?" she asked on the 6th evening, looking at her plate. "Shakshuka, eggs poached in tomato sauce with spices." Lily looked at it for a long moment. "You didn't learn this from a recipe, did you?" "I watched 2 videos. That's a recipe." "It's more interpretive." Lily picked up her fork and tried it carefully. She chewed. She considered. "It's good," she said, with the tone of someone who hadn't entirely expected to say that. "I know," Vanessa said. "You're not supposed to say, 'I know.' Would you prefer I pretend I wasn't sure?" Lily considered this. "No," she decided. "I like that you don't do that." They ate in comfortable silence for a while. "My friend Emma says you're famous," Lily said. Vanessa looked up from her plate. "Your friend Emma is 8 years old." "She Googled you." "Of course she did." "She said you're on the cover of a magazine." "That was one magazine and I didn't choose the photo." Lily was studying her with the assessing look. "Does it bother you, being famous?" Vanessa thought about it honestly rather than giving the diplomatic answer. It bothers me that it changes how people see me before I've said a word. I'd rather be seen for what I do than for what I'm worth. Lily nodded slowly, processing. That's what Dad says about the military stuff. He doesn't want people to treat him like a hero. He says it makes them stop seeing him as a person. The kitchen was quiet except for the sound of the lake wind against the window. Vanessa turned her fork in her hand and thought about the two people in this small house, Ryan's daughter, Vanessa's life, and how they had both spent considerable effort trying to be seen accurately, and how rarely it worked, and how much that shared frustration had probably been the first real thing between them before either of them noticed it happening. Ryan called when he could, which was not often and not on any predictable schedule. The calls came through on a number Vanessa didn't recognize and lasted, on average, 11 minutes. She'd started keeping track without meaning to. He always spoke to Lily first. Vanessa would hand the phone over and go to another room, because whatever passed between them in those 11-minute windows was theirs. When Lily was done, she'd bring the phone back with both hands, like something fragile, and say, "He wants to talk to you," in a voice carefully arranged to sound casual. "Everything's fine here," Vanessa said the first time. "Lily's doing well. We have a routine." "I know," he said. "She told me." "She told you about the shakshuka?" "She said you cooked something aggressively international, and it was good." Vanessa laughed, and the laugh sounded strange coming out of her. Too genuine for a phone call with a man she'd known 3 months, too unguarded. She heard him register it, the slight change in quality on the other end of the line. "How are you?" she asked. "Fine." "That's not an answer." A pause. "I'm operational," he said, which she understood was the closest he was going to get. "Okay," she said, and then, "Be careful." He was quiet for a moment. "Yeah," he said. "You too." She held the phone after the call ended and stood in the hallway of her rented lake house and worked out how she felt about a man she'd known 3 months who was somewhere she wasn't allowed to know about, doing things she wasn't allowed to know about, trusting her with the most important thing in his life. It was complicated. That was the most honest word she had for it. The call from Marcus came on a Monday in early January when Vanessa was in the school pickup line, which was something she now navigated with a competence that still surprised her. "We have a problem," Marcus said. He had a talent for opening calls this way. No preamble, straight to the emergency, which she'd always appreciated and which now filled her stomach with cold water. Define problem. Crestline Partners has been quietly accumulating Meridian shares for the past 6 weeks. They crossed the 15% threshold 2 days ago without disclosure, which means they've been sitting on a securities violation while they built position. They filed this morning. Vanessa sat in the pickup line with her hands on the wheel and her mind moving very fast through the implications. Crestline Partners. She knew the name, knew it the way you knew the names of people who'd tried to hurt you before and hadn't finished the job. "Who's behind it?" she said. "Formally, it's a consortium. Informally," he stopped. "Marcus. Harlan Voss." The name landed in her chest like something physical. Harlan Voss had been one of the investors she'd exposed 18 months ago. Not the primary architect, but a significant participant, and the one who had the most resources to rebuild and retaliate. She'd known abstractly that he wasn't done. People like Voss were never done. They just regrouped. "What are they offering?" she said. 42 a share. It's a 14% premium. It's an insult. The board convenes Thursday. Some of them are going to be tempted. Lily appeared through the school doors, spotted Vanessa's car, and walked toward it with her backpack bouncing. Vanessa watched her cross the parking lot. That particular walk, straight-backed and deliberate, her father's economy of motion already starting to show in her posture, and felt two things simultaneously: the cold, focused clarity of a fight she knew how to have, and something else entirely that had nothing to do with Meridian Capital or Harlan Voss or $42 a share. "I'm coming back to New York," she said. "When?" "Wednesday morning. Have the full position analysis on my desk before noon." She ended the call as Lily pulled open the passenger door and climbed in, dropping her backpack between her feet. "You have your business face on," Lily said. Vanessa looked at her. My business face. You get very still and your eyes go somewhere else. She buckled her seatbelt. What happened? Vanessa pulled out of the line, navigating past the other cars, buying herself a moment. She'd never had to calibrate how much to tell a child before. It was a different kind of calculation. Not about what was strategic, but about what was honest without being alarming, what was real without being too heavy. My company is under attack, she said. I have to go to New York for a little while to deal with it. Lily turned to look at her directly. How long? I don't know yet. Weeks, maybe. I'll come back on weekends, and you'll come with me initially. I'm not leaving you here alone. I can't miss school. I'll arrange remote work with your teacher. It's not ideal, but Vanessa. Lily's voice was quiet but very clear. I want to stay here. This is where Dad's going to call. This is where he thinks I am. Vanessa stopped at the light at the end of the school road and sat with that. It was completely reasonable. It was also the kind of thing that made her chest do the pressing thing again, the thing she'd started cataloging as what happened when Lily said something that revealed how clearly the girl was thinking and how much of her clarity was actually just love laid out in practical terms. I'll talk to Donna, Vanessa said. She has a daughter your age. I'd rather stay with Mrs. Heller. Lily said it carefully, like she'd thought about it already. Her teacher. She offered once when Dad had a last-minute work thing. She lives 5 minutes from school. You've already thought about this. I think about backup plans, Lily said. Dad taught me. Vanessa drove the rest of the way home with her hands steady on the wheel and her mind running 2 separate tracks. The Meridian track, which was already organizing itself into action items and legal strategies, and the particular cold anger she kept in reserve for people who tried to take what she'd built. And the Lily track, which was quieter and less organized and more important than she'd fully admitted to herself until that moment. She flew to New York on Wednesday morning and walked into the Meridian Capital offices at 11:45, and the moment she stepped off the elevator, she could feel the change in the air, the particular quality of a building waiting to find out which way something was going to fall. Her assistant, Priya, met her at the elevator with a tablet and the expression of someone who had been professionally calm for several weeks and was holding on by a thread. Board meeting's been moved to tomorrow morning. The position analysis is on your desk. The legal team needs an hour this afternoon, and there are 6 interview requests from financial press. Decline all of them, Vanessa said, and push the legal meeting to 3. She walked into her office and stood for a moment looking at the New York skyline, same skyline she'd looked at for 7 years, same gray January sky over the same impossible architecture, and felt how far she was from a lake in Maine and a kitchen table and an 8-year-old who had opinions about sandwich cuts. Then she sat down and got to work. The position analysis was thorough and bleak, in the specific way financial documents were bleak. The numbers told a story that was accurate and incomplete at the same time. Crestline had been methodical. They'd used a network of smaller entities to accumulate shares below the disclosure threshold, which was either sophisticated or illegal or both. And Vanessa suspected her legal team was going to have opinions about which. She was right. At 3 o'clock, her chief legal officer, a woman named Soo Jin, who had never raised her voice in a professional context and was more terrifying for it, laid out the securities violation case with the precision of someone who had been building it for the past 72 hours. They didn't disclose at 13D threshold, Soo Jin said. The filing they submitted this morning was triggered by the hostile intent, not the position size, and they knew it. They've been in violation for at least 2 weeks. Can we move on it before the board meeting? We can file a complaint with the SEC today. It won't stop the meeting, but it poisons the offering. Any board member who votes for the acquisition while there's an active securities complaint against the acquirer is opening themselves to liability. Vanessa looked at the documents on the desk. Who on the board is vulnerable? Soo Jin glanced at Marcus, who was standing by the window with his arms crossed. He said, We think Harmon and possibly Delgado. Harmon has been quiet since we restructured, and quiet from Harmon is never good. Delgado has been under pressure from his own investors, and a 14% premium is the kind of number that makes people stop asking questions. Then I need to talk to them before tomorrow. Both of them? Both of them tonight. She said it flatly, like it was already decided, because it was. Get me Harmon at 6 and Delgado at 8. In person, not on the phone. If they're in the building, have them stay. Marcus looked at her. Welcome back, he said. She didn't acknowledge this. She was already reading the next document. The conversation with Harmon went the way she'd expected. Carefully, with a man who was thinking about his options and hadn't decided yet. She didn't threaten him. Threats were for people who had already decided. She laid out the exposure cleanly. The securities complaint, the reputational association with a firm that had violated federal disclosure law, the fact that Crestline's premium was structured to dissolve 18 months post-acquisition through clawback provisions that she was fairly certain Harmon hadn't read carefully enough. This isn't an offer, she told him. It's a trap. And anyone who walks into it with their eyes open is going to spend the next 3 years explaining it to their own boards. Harmon was quiet for a long time. He was 63, silver-haired, and had spent decades making the kind of careful decisions that kept him in rooms like this one. She watched him think. If the SEC complaint has merit, he said finally. It has merit, Sujin said from the chair by the wall. Another silence. I'll need to see the analysis tonight. It's already on its way to you, Vanessa said. Delgado was harder. He was under real pressure from his own stakeholders, and a 14% premium was, from where he sat, concrete and immediate, while the risks Vanessa was describing were theoretical and future tense. She understood his position. Understanding it didn't make her more sympathetic. They will gut Meridian, she told him. You know what Harlan Voss does with companies he acquires. You've seen it twice. He extracts value and exits and leaves a shell. Your stakeholders will see a 14% pop and then a 40% loss inside 18 months. Delgado looked at his hands. You can't guarantee that. No, she said. I can't. But you can look at what happened to the last 2 companies Crestline acquired and make your own assessment. He was quiet. I'm not asking you to do this for me, she said. I'm asking you to do it because the math is right. If the math changes, I'll tell you. She walked out of the building at 10:15 p.m. It was cold and the sidewalk was mostly empty, and the city pressed in from all sides with its particular density. All that life stacked vertically, all those lit windows, all that noise contained and concentrated. She'd loved New York for years. She stood on the sidewalk outside her own building and realized she wanted to get back to Maine. She took out her phone. It was too late to call. But there was a text from an unsaved number that she'd saved under the single letter R, 3 hours old, which meant he'd sent it in what would have been mid-evening wherever he was. Lily said you went to New York. Everything okay? She stood on the sidewalk and typed back. Company under attack. Handling it. Lily is with her teacher. She's fine. She didn't expect a response. She was already putting the phone away when it buzzed. You okay? She looked at the 2 words on the screen. From a man who was somewhere dangerous doing something she wasn't allowed to know about, who was asking whether she was okay while she stood outside a glass tower in Midtown Manhattan about to fight a man who wanted to take her company. She typed, getting there. A pause. Then, good. She put the phone in her pocket and went back inside. The board meeting lasted 4 hours and 20 minutes and was one of the most technically complicated fights she'd conducted in her career, which was saying something. Sujin presented the securities complaint. Vanessa presented the acquisition analysis, the Crestline track record, the clawback structure buried in the offer documents. Harmon asked precise, skeptical questions that she realized halfway through were designed to give her the opportunity to answer them for the other members who weren't asking. Delgado was quiet until the last 40 minutes. Then he asked one question about the valuation methodology Crestline had used for their premium calculation, and the way he asked it told her he'd done the reading she'd suggested. The vote was 8-2 against accepting the offer. She sat at the head of the table and listened to the numbers and felt the thing she always felt in the immediate aftermath of this kind of win. Not elation, not relief, but a very flat, very specific exhaustion, like the last mile of something you've been running a long time. We still have the SEC complaint to run, Sujin said afterward, when the room had mostly cleared. I know. And Voss will restructure and try again. Not immediately, but I know, Vanessa said again. She was looking out the window at the gray January sky. Can you give me a few minutes? Sujin left. Marcus was already gone. She sat alone in the boardroom for a while. She'd sat in this room dozens of times, fought in it, negotiated in it, held herself together in it through things she'd never entirely told anyone. She knew the room. She knew the table and the view and the quality of silence that settled in when the last person left. She got out her phone and looked at the text conversation. Then she called Lily's teacher and confirmed that everything was fine and Lily had slept well and eaten breakfast and was in class. Then she booked a flight back to Portland for the following morning. She did not book a return to New York. She sat in the empty boardroom and looked at her hands on the table. The same hands that had signed the documents that built this company, that had shaken hands with people who later tried to destroy her, that had fixed exactly nothing in the practical sense, and managed somehow in the past 2 months to learn how to make a passable diagonal sandwich cut. And she thought about what she was going to do next and how to do it and why. She didn't have all the answers, but she knew where she needed to be while she figured them out, and that, for now, was enough. She was back in Harlow's Cove by early afternoon the next day. The drive from Portland took 50 minutes in light traffic, and she spent most of it with the radio off, watching the highway give way to 2-lane roads and then to the particular kind of quiet that the town carried in winter. Bare trees, gray lake, the smoke from chimneys that meant people were actually home and staying there. She'd grown up in Connecticut, which had its own version of this landscape, but she hadn't thought of it as home since she was 17. She wasn't sure what to call what she felt pulling into Harlow's Cove, except that it was something in the category of returning rather than arriving. Mrs. Heller's house was a yellow Victorian 3 blocks from the school with a wraparound porch and wind chimes that probably drove the neighbors insane. Vanessa knocked at 2:15 and the door opened to reveal Lily in her after-school clothes, jeans and a sweater with a small paint stain on the sleeve that suggested an art project, holding a book with her finger marking her place. She looked at Vanessa for a moment with the assessing eyes. "You won," she said. Vanessa looked at her. "How do you know that?" "You look tired, but not scared anymore." She stepped back from the door. "Mrs. Heller made cookies. They're fine, but a little dry." Mrs. Heller appeared from the kitchen, wiping her hands on a dish towel, a woman in her mid-50s with reading glasses pushed up on her head and an expression of genuine warmth that Vanessa, who had spent years navigating the performance of warmth, recognized immediately as the real thing. "She was wonderful," Mrs. Heller said. "No trouble at all. She helped me reorganize my bookshelf, which I've been putting off for 2 years. "By subject or author?" Vanessa asked. "Subject first, then author within subject," Lily said, from the couch where she'd already returned to her book. The way it was organized made no sense. "It was organized by color," Mrs. Heller said to Vanessa, slightly apologetically. "I thought it looked nice." "It looked nice," Lily said, without looking up, "but you couldn't find anything." Vanessa gathered Lily's bag and thanked Mrs. Heller, and they walked to the car in the cold afternoon light. And when Lily climbed in and buckled up, she turned to look at Vanessa with something more careful in her expression than the casual assessment from the doorway. "Are you okay?" she asked. "Yeah," Vanessa said. "I'm okay." "You don't have to say you're okay if you're not." "I don't mind." Vanessa looked at the girl across the center console. 8 years old, paint on her sleeve, fingers still in her book, watching her with clear, patient eyes. "I'm tired," Vanessa said, which was more honest. "I won a fight I needed to win, and winning fights is exhausting in ways people don't talk about." Lily nodded, considering this carefully, because you have to hold all the fear while you're doing it, and you can't put it down until it's over. Vanessa turned the key in the ignition. "Yeah," she said quietly. "Exactly like that." February settled into Harlow's Cove with the particular stubbornness of northern winter. Not brutal, but persistent, the cold arriving every morning like an obligation. Vanessa worked from the lake house, flying to New York for 2 or 3 days at a stretch every few weeks, and driving back feeling each time the slight decompression of leaving the city's density behind. The SEC complaint moved forward without her direct involvement. Sujin had it handled. Crestline Partners issued a withdrawal of the acquisition offer in the second week of February, not because they were required to, but because the securities investigation and the board vote together had made the position untenable. It came through on a Thursday afternoon as a press release from their attorneys, carefully worded and aggressively vague. Marcus called when it hit. "That's it," he said. "They're out." She was sitting on the back porch with coffee and the lake in front of her, frozen at the edges and dark in the center. And Lily was inside working on a book report that had been due last Friday and had been extended by a teacher who apparently understood that Lily's definition of late and the assignment's definition of late were philosophical rather than practical disagreements. "What about Voss?" she said. "He'll regroup. Might be a year, might be two. But we've got the documentation from the SEC filing, and any future move he makes is going to start from a more exposed position. Have legal put together a permanent monitoring structure. I don't want to be surprised again." "Already started." A pause. "You coming back in?" She looked at the lake. A single bird was crossing it, low over the water, moving without apparent urgency. "I'll be in on the 20th for the quarterly review. Otherwise, I'm staying remote for now." A longer pause. Marcus was not a man who expressed opinions he hadn't been asked for, which was one of the things she valued about him, but she could hear him working out how to say something. "Say it," she said. "I've worked for you for 4 years," he said. "I've never seen you take 3 months away from this company, and I've never seen you make better decisions." She sat with that for a moment. "Don't make it into a lesson, Marcus." "I'm not. I'm just... For what it's worth, the company is in better shape than when you left." "I know it is." "Okay," he said. 20th. She ended the call and sat with the cold coffee and the frozen lake and thought about what Marcus hadn't said, which was that the decision she'd made in January had been cleaner than her usual operating mode, less reactive, more certain about what actually mattered, and more willing to let go of what didn't. She'd always been capable. What she hadn't always been was clear. And clarity, she was slowly understanding, had a geography. It wasn't something she'd found by working harder. It was something she'd found by being somewhere quiet long enough for the noise to settle. Ryan called on a Tuesday evening in mid-February, and this time it wasn't the usual 11 minutes. This time she heard something different in his voice. Not distress exactly, but a particular tension that sat underneath the words. He spoke to Lily for 7 minutes. When Lily brought the phone back, she had the composed expression she wore when she was not going to cry about something in front of another person. "He's okay," she told Vanessa preemptively. "He just sounded tired." "Okay," Vanessa said. Lily handed her the phone and went to her room and closed the door, which she did sometimes, and which Vanessa had learned to respect without comment. "Hey," Vanessa said. "Hey." His voice was lower than usual, more worn. "Sorry for the late call." "Don't apologize. What's going on?" A pause that was slightly too long. "Long few weeks." "Can you say more than that?" "No." She sat down at the kitchen table. Outside the window, the lake was black and still under a cloudy sky. "Are you hurt?" "No." "Are your people okay?" Another pause, this one different in quality. "Not all of them." She closed her eyes briefly, opened them. "I'm sorry." "Yeah." He was quiet for a moment. "How's she doing? Really?" "Really? She's remarkable," Vanessa said. "She held a book report 2 weeks past its due date because she had opinions about the 3rd chapter, and her teacher apparently agreed, and now they're having what I can only describe as an academic argument via margin notes that I think they're both enjoying more than either of them will admit." A beat. "She's doing well, Ryan. She misses you. But she's steady." He exhaled. She heard it clearly, the release of something he'd been holding at a distance. "She gets the steadiness from her mother," he said, and it was the first time he'd mentioned her directly to Vanessa. The sentence was short and flat in a way that said he'd made peace with it but hadn't forgotten the weight. Vanessa didn't push. "How much longer?" 6 weeks, maybe 8. Depends on how the next phase goes." "Okay. Is that..." He stopped, started again. "Is that still manageable? On your end?" She thought about the question. She thought about the morning routine and the diagonal sandwiches and the midnight bedside visits and the book report debate and the way Lily had looked at her from the doorway of Mrs. Heller's house and said you won like she'd known what to look for. She thought about coming back to this house after New York and how the word that had come to her was returning. Yes, she said. It's still manageable. Another pause. Thank you, Vanessa. She didn't say you're welcome because it didn't feel like the right shape for what was actually passing between them. Get some sleep, she said instead. Yeah. A moment. You too. She put the phone on the table and sat in the kitchen and listened to the house. After a while, she heard Lily's door open, and then Lily's footsteps in the hallway, and then Lily appeared in the kitchen doorway in her pajamas with her hair loose and her face carrying the particular expression of someone who had gone to their room to do something private and was now done. Do you want hot chocolate? Vanessa asked. Lily came to the table and sat down. Yes. Vanessa got up and made it. The proper way, with actual cocoa powder and milk and a small amount of sugar, which Lily had explained with some urgency early on was categorically different from the powder and hot water version. While she stood at the stove, Lily sat at the table behind her and was quiet in a way that was not uncomfortable. He lost someone, Lily said. Not a question. Vanessa turned from the stove. He didn't say that exactly. He doesn't say things exactly, but I can tell. She was looking at the table. He sounds the same way he did when we found out about Sergeant Briggs, his friend from before. Vanessa turned back to the stove and gave her something to do with her hands, stirring the cocoa. Your dad is good at carrying things, she said carefully. Too good, Lily said. He carries things for so long they become part of him, and he stops noticing they're there. Vanessa poured the hot chocolate into Lily's mug, the one that was Lily's mug, the blue one with the small chip on the handle that had been there when Vanessa rented the house, and brought it to the table and sat down. Lily wrapped her hands around the mug. She looked at the surface of the hot chocolate for a moment. I'm glad you're here, she said. She said it simply, without sentimentality, the way she said most things that were true. I mean that in a specific way, not just because someone needs to be here, because it's you. Vanessa sat across from this 8-year-old in the kitchen of a lake house in Maine at 10 o'clock on a Tuesday night and felt something she didn't know how to describe and didn't try to. I'm glad I'm here too, she said. Okay, Lily said, and drank her hot chocolate. March came in wet and tentative, the lake ice receding from the edges first, water reappearing in dark rings that spread slowly outward as the temperature climbed. Lily had a science project on water cycles, and Vanessa found herself, one Saturday morning, at the edge of the lake with her, watching the melt in progress and answering questions about evaporation and condensation that required more scientific recall than she'd expected. You're actually good at this, Lily said, which from Lily was a genuine compliment, unqualified. I studied environmental science for a semester before I switched to business, Vanessa said. Why did you switch? Because I was better at business. That's very practical. I was a practical 20-year-old. Lily looked at the water. I want to study something I love, she said. Not something I'm just good at. Vanessa looked at her. What do you love? Books, she said it without embarrassment. Not just reading them, the way they work. Why some of them last 100 years and some of them disappear. That's called literary criticism, or publishing, or writing. Can you make money doing those things? Some people do. It's harder than business. Lily considered this with the characteristic seriousness. Dad says hard and impossible are different. Your dad is right. He's right about a lot of things, Lily said, just not about vegetables. He thinks kale is fine. It's not fine. Vanessa laughed. The genuine kind, the kind that came up fast and unprepared. And Lily looked at her sideways with the small, private satisfaction of someone who had calculated that the joke would land. They walked back to the house with cold feet, and the science project questions mostly answered, and Vanessa made lunch while Lily wrote up her notes, and the morning moved into afternoon the way mornings in Harlow's Cove had started to move. Not urgently, not toward anything in particular, just forward. The message came on a Saturday in the third week of March. Not a call. A text from the R number at 6:40 a.m. Wheels up tonight. Home in 36 hours. She read it 3 times standing at the kitchen window with her coffee. Then she went down the hall and knocked on Lily's door. "Come in," Lily said, already awake. She was always awake early, another thing she'd inherited. Vanessa opened the door. Lily was sitting up in bed with her book, and she looked at Vanessa's face and put the book down. "Dad," she said, "he's coming home. 36 hours." Lily was quiet for a long moment. Something moved across her face that was too large and too complicated for 8 years old and made her look, briefly, much younger. The specific, undefended expression of a child who has been holding something carefully for a long time and has just been told they can put it down. She didn't cry. She'd said she wouldn't, and she didn't. But her chin moved once before she got it still. 36 hours, she said. Give or take. Lily looked at the window, at the March morning light coming in at a low angle across the floor. She was thinking about something. Vanessa could see her thinking about it. "We should make something," Lily said finally, "for when he gets here. He always comes back to an empty house, and I hate that. What do you want to make?" "His thing." She was already getting out of bed. "The soup, the one he makes when it's cold. I know how. I've watched him 100 times. It's not that cold anymore." "It doesn't matter," Lily said. "It's the soup he makes when he's home. That's the point." What? They spent most of Sunday cooking and cleaning, which was not something Vanessa had planned to do with a Sunday, but which turned out to be exactly the right use of it. Lily directed the soup from memory. A beef and vegetable situation with particular opinions about the order in which things went into the pot. And Vanessa followed instructions with a willingness she hadn't expected to feel. "More salt," Lily said. "You just said less salt." "That was 3 minutes ago. The potatoes absorbed it." Vanessa added more salt. "How do you know this?" "I paid attention," she said it matter-of-factly. "You learn things when you pay attention. Your teacher has been good for you." "Which one? Mrs. Heller or you?" Vanessa turned to look at her. Lily was focused on stirring the pot with total concentration and deliberate casualness, the face of someone who had put something into a sentence and was waiting to see what happened to it. "I'm not your teacher," Vanessa said. "I know, I just used the wrong word." She didn't say what word she should have used. Neither did Vanessa. He came back on a Monday. Vanessa hadn't planned the logistics of his return with any particular intentionality. She was in her own house when she heard the car on the gravel at just past noon, and she stayed inside. This was his moment with Lily, not hers. She understood that clearly, and the clarity wasn't painful exactly, just definite. She heard the car door. She heard Lily, who had been watching the window for 40 minutes, go out the front door at a speed that suggested running. And then she heard nothing from outside because whatever happened in those first few seconds in the driveway was not a thing that came with sound she could make out from her kitchen. She made tea she didn't want and looked at her laptop and read the same paragraph of a quarterly report 3 times. 15 minutes later, there was a knock at her back door. She opened it. He looked different and exactly the same. Thinner, maybe. A cut along his jaw that was healing but still visible. He was still in the clothes he'd traveled in, dark jacket, worn jeans, and he was carrying, she noticed, his bag, which he hadn't put down yet, like he'd come here before going inside. Lily was standing just behind him, slightly to the side, with her arms crossed, and the expression of someone who had orchestrated this and was allowing it to proceed at its own speed. "Hi," Vanessa said. "Hi," Ryan said. They looked at each other in the doorway for a moment. It was not a comfortable silence, and it was not an uncomfortable one. It was the silence of 2 people who had a lot to say and were working out where to start. "Lily says you fixed the garden fence," he said. She blinked. The post was leaning. "She said you used the wrong bit on the drill, and it still came out level." "I improvised." "That's what she said." Something moved in his face that wasn't quite a smile but was adjacent to one. "Come have soup," he said. "She made it." "I helped," Vanessa said. "She said that too." He paused. She said you added too much salt and she had to correct it twice. That is factually accurate, Lily said from behind him. Vanessa looked at them both, the man in the traveled-in clothes with the healing cut on his jaw, and the girl with her arms crossed and her careful eyes and her particular private satisfaction. And she felt something she recognized as home, which was not a feeling she'd associated with any specific place since she was very young. She stepped back from the door and let them in. They ate soup at the kitchen table in the blue-shuttered house. Ryan's kitchen, not hers, and she'd come through the backyard with the pot while Lily held the door, and somehow that was the house where they ended up. The kitchen with the mismatched chairs and the corkboard full of school papers and the cheap drip coffee maker. Ryan ate 2 bowls and didn't say much, and she could see the exhaustion sitting on him the way it sits on people who have been running on necessity for a long time and have just been given permission to stop. He asked Lily questions about school and the book report and Mrs. Heller and the water cycle project, and he listened to the answers with the full focused attention he gave everything. And occasionally his eyes moved to Vanessa with a quality she couldn't entirely interpret, which was new. She'd learned to read him fairly well over the past months, or thought she had, but this was something she didn't have a category for yet. After Lily went to do homework, the kitchen got quiet in the way kitchens get quiet when the person who animates the space has left it. Ryan put his hands around his coffee mug, the holding habit, the same as always, and looked at the table. 4 months, he said. About that. She's different. How? He considered it. More confident, the way she talks about things. He paused. She argued with me about the salt. She was right about the salt. I know she was. He looked up. She wasn't always like that. She'd defer to adults even when she knew better. She'd wait to see what someone else said first. Vanessa looked at him across the table. She has opinions. She's always had them. She's always had them, he agreed. She didn't always believe they were worth saying out loud. The kitchen was very quiet. What changed? He asked. Not like he didn't know, like he wanted to hear her say it. I don't know exactly, she said. I argued back when she was right. I told her when she was wrong. I didn't treat her opinions as things to manage. She stopped. I just talked to her like she was a person. She is a person, he said mildly. I know. I mean, I talked to her like her opinions had consequences, like they would actually change things. He was quiet for a moment, then, thank you for all of it. Not just the routine and the school and all of it. She didn't know what to do with direct gratitude from this man, had never entirely known. She made it easy, she said, which was half true. She's remarkable. She is. He turned the mug in his hands. You're part of why she is now, whether you're comfortable with that or not. Vanessa looked at the table. There was a scratch in the wood near her left hand, an old one, and she traced it with her finger. I'm comfortable with it, she said quietly. Ryan looked at her. The look lasted longer than his usual looks, the brief assessment she'd catalogued over months. And this one had something in it that was both more and different, something that hadn't been there in October or November, something that had apparently accumulated while they were not in the same place. I thought about you, he said. Over there. She kept her eyes on the table for a moment, then she looked up. I know, I could tell from the texts. You could tell from everything okay? You didn't ask Marcus, you asked me. He sat with that, turned the mug once more. Yeah, he said. I did. Outside the kitchen window, the late March afternoon was doing something tentative and almost spring. Pale light through the bare trees, the lake gray-blue and moving slightly at the edges, the garden waiting for the ground to give a little more. She'd watched it from this angle 100 times over the past months, from her own window, from this window, from the porch in the cold. You're not leaving, he said. It wasn't a question, but it also wasn't quite a statement. She thought about New York, about the penthouse and the NASDAQ, and the morning she'd packed 2 bags and told her driver to go north. About the boardroom and the fight she'd won, and the city she'd stood outside of and wanted to leave. About the quarterly reviews and the SEC complaint, and the career she'd built from nothing that now ran with or without her. I'm not leaving, she said. Ryan nodded once. He picked up his coffee. Pete at the hardware store is going to have opinions, he said. Pete can mind his own business. He won't. I know he won't, she said. I've been here long enough to know that. Something settled across his face that she recognized from the day he'd handed her the fence post repair and the day he'd left for the airport in the rain. Except this version was different. This version didn't have anywhere to go. Good, he said. Lily came back into the kitchen at that point with her homework and the expression of someone who had timed her reappearance with intention, climbed into her chair, and opened her notebook without comment, which was the most pointed kind of comment available. Vanessa looked at her across the table. Lily looked back with those clear, patient eyes. The soup was good, Vanessa said. It was, Lily agreed, even with the salt situation. Ryan looked at them both, something quiet and careful and nearly undone moving behind his eyes, and he turned back to his coffee before either of them could see all of it. But Vanessa saw enough. The first week after Ryan came home was strange in ways Vanessa hadn't anticipated. She'd spent 4 months building a life around his absence, around the routines and the rhythms and the particular shape of a household organized by 2 people instead of 3. And now he was back and the shape had to rearrange itself, and the rearranging was not seamless. It was the kind of adjustment that revealed by its awkwardness how much had quietly changed while nobody was tracking it. He was different too, not in ways that were immediately visible. He still fixed things without being asked and moved with the same economy and made Lily's dinner at the same time every evening. But there were moments when he'd stop in the middle of something and go very still, the way people do when a sound from somewhere internal gets louder than the sounds around them, and she'd learned from 4 months of phone calls and 11-minute windows that those moments were not nothing. She didn't comment on them. She just noted them the way you note weather, as information about conditions, not as problems to be solved. He was doing the same thing with her. She caught it once, on the 3rd day, when she was sitting at his kitchen table with her laptop running a call on mute while she reviewed a contract, and she looked up and he was standing in the doorway with a coffee mug and an expression she hadn't seen him wear before. Something open and a little unguarded, as if he'd been watching for a while without intending to and hadn't quite reset his face before she turned. He lifted his mug slightly. More coffee? I'm fine, she said. He nodded and went back to whatever he'd been doing, and she looked at her laptop screen and read the same clause 4 times. About 7. The conversation they needed to have didn't happen in the kitchen over soup. It didn't happen in any of the places she might have staged it if she were staging things, which she wasn't. She'd spent enough years constructing the surfaces of situations that she'd lost the appetite for it. It happened on a Thursday evening in the 4th week of March, on her back porch, which was where most of the real things between them had happened, the warped board on the porch now replaced and level under her feet. Lily was at a sleepover at Emma's house, the first one she'd agreed to, because Emma had Google searched Vanessa and considered this sufficient grounds for elevated social trust, a logic Lily had explained with the straight face she reserved for things she found privately funny. The lake was doing something beautiful that Vanessa didn't remark on because the kind of beauty that announces itself feels like a distraction from the actual thing. It was just the lake in late March, going from gray to dark as the light left it, and they were sitting in the 2 chairs she'd dragged out from inside because the temperature was hovering at the low edge of tolerable, and this felt like an outdoor conversation. I want to ask you something, Ryan said. He had his coffee, of course. The mug holding, the constant mug holding, which she had long since stopped noticing and had recently started noticing again with a specificity that told her something about her own state of mind. Okay, she said. When you said you weren't leaving, he stopped. Not from uncertainty. He was one of those people who stopped mid-sentence because he was weighing the words, not because he didn't have them. I want to know what you meant by that. I think you know what I meant. I think I do too. But I've been wrong before about what things meant, and the stakes of being wrong about this particular thing are... He paused again. Hi. She turned her coffee cup in her hands. She'd picked up the habit from him without noticing until Lily had pointed it out one afternoon with mild amusement. What are the stakes? She asked, not to make him say it for her benefit, because she wanted to hear how he understood them. He looked at the lake. "Lily," he said, first. "Yes." "She's not a child who attaches easily. She spent 2 years after her mother left being careful about who she let in. It took her 8 months in this town to stop carrying her stuffed animals in a bag because she didn't want to unpack them somewhere she might have to leave." He said it steadily, without accusation or sentimentality. "She's let you in, completely. Whatever happens between you and me, she doesn't get to opt out of the consequences." "I know," Vanessa said. "I need to know that you know it the way I know it, not in the abstract." She thought about the midnight bedroom visits, about the fraction worksheets and the sourdough disaster and the diagonal sandwich cut and the hot chocolate mug that had become Lily's mug, about the morning she'd come back from New York and Lily had looked at her face and said, "You won," and she'd understood in that instant that someone was paying the kind of attention to her that she hadn't been paid since she was very young. She thought about what Lily had said at the kitchen table the night Ryan called tired. "I'm glad you're here. Not just because someone needs to be here, because it's you." "I know it the way you know it," she said. He looked at her then, direct and held. "Okay," he said. "Second." "What second?" "You." He said it simply. "You came here to stop running. That's what you said on this porch, roughly. And then you ran a company from a lake house for 4 months and fought off a hostile takeover and flew back to this town after every trip like it was the place your compass pointed." A beat. "I need to know if I'm a reason you stayed or a side effect of where you stayed." It was the most honest question anyone had asked her in years. She sat with it long enough to make sure the answer she gave was the same quality as the question. "You're not a side effect," she said, "but I want to tell you something true, and I need you to hear it as true rather than as a complication." "Okay." "I didn't come here for you. I didn't know you existed, and for the first couple of weeks I wasn't sure I had room for anything beyond whatever I was trying to put back together in myself." She looked at the lake. "But you were honest with me from the beginning, not performing, not adjusting, not calculating what version of yourself would get the best result. I don't have a lot of experience with that. From anyone." She paused. "And Lily, you raise someone who talks to adults like they owe each other honesty, who understands that being seen matters more than being managed." She turned to look at him. "You can't raise a person like that by accident. You have to be that person yourself." He was looking at his coffee mug. "I'm not here because you're convenient," she said, "or because the lake is quiet, or because I needed a reason to stop. I'm here because you're someone worth staying for, both of you." She stopped herself before she said anything else, because there was a version of this speech that went on too long, and she'd learned early in business that the strongest statements were the ones that ended before they needed to. Ryan was quiet for a while, long enough that she might have been worried, except that she'd learned his silences by now. This one was the processing kind, not the retreat kind. "I'm not easy to be with," he said. "I want you to know that going in. I'm aware. You fixed my fence twice and you still don't initiate conversations. I mean the other things." He said it carefully. "The stuff I carry around from before. The nights where the quiet isn't actually quiet. The way I sometimes leave a room because I need 4 minutes of no input and it's not about anyone in the room." He looked at her directly. "I've spent 3 years thinking I wasn't, that what I came back with was too much to ask another person to be near." "Ryan, I'm saying it because you should know it before—" "I know it," she said. "I've been next door for 6 months. I've had 4 months of 11-minute phone calls where you told me you were operational. I've watched you go still in the middle of making dinner and come back 30 seconds later like it didn't happen. I'm not telling you it's nothing. I'm telling you it's not too much." He pressed his mouth together, looked at the lake. "Okay," he said. His voice was lower than usual and slightly rough. "Okay." She left it there. Didn't push past it into anything more articulate because some things didn't need to be more articulate. They needed to be said once and meant, and then left to do their work in the quiet. The lake had gone fully dark now. The porch light Ryan's timer clicked on. 5:30, same as always, same as the house next door, same steady on time that it had maintained all winter, whether anyone was home or not. "Pete at the hardware store is going to be insufferable about this," Ryan said. She laughed. It came out fast and genuine, which was how her laughs had started coming out somewhere around month 2 of Harlow's Cove, without her planning or controlling them. You already said that. It bears repeating. I can handle Pete. I know you can. That's what worries me. He's going to think you're wonderful. I am wonderful. He looked at her sideways, the almost smile. Yeah, he said, quietly, like he wasn't entirely saying it to her. You are. She didn't respond to that. She held her coffee and watched the dark lake and let the statement exist without diminishing it by answering it. April came and the lake woke up. The ice finished its retreat and the water went back to blue and then to the particular blue-green it was in spring, and the mornings started arriving with actual light in them rather than the flat gray of winter. Lily's garden, Ryan's garden, which Lily had been tending since February with advice from Ryan delivered via the occasional text and a library book on cold climate planting that she'd checked out and renewed twice, started showing the first green at the soil line. She crouched over it every morning before school with focused intensity and reported progress at dinner with the seriousness of a field researcher. The beans are coming up, she announced one evening in early April, sitting at the dinner table in Ryan's kitchen. Their kitchen, Vanessa had started thinking of it, without examining the thought too carefully. 3 of them. The 4th one I don't think made it. Give it another week, Ryan said. It's a slow starter. Or it's dead. Possible, he agreed, but assume alive until proven otherwise. Lily looked at him. Is that a metaphor? It's gardening advice. It sounds like a metaphor. Eat your dinner. Lily ate her dinner with the expression of someone who had accepted a partial victory. Vanessa kept her face neutral and reached for the bread. It was a Tuesday, which had become in the past few weeks a dinner at Ryan's night without any formal declaration. The same way the homework sessions and the hot chocolate and the porch conversations had never been formally declared. Things just became true through repetition, through showing up, through the accumulated weight of days that added up to something structural. She thought about that sometimes, about how the most important things in her life had never been decided in any single moment. Her company hadn't been built in one decision. It had been built in thousands of days of showing up when it would have been easier not to. And this, whatever this was, this kitchen and this table and these 2 people, was being built the same way, not in a declaration or a dramatic pivot, in soup and garden updates and the particular Tuesday night quality of 3 people who had found their way to the same table without planning it. This was not a lesson she could have told herself at 23. Or at 28, when she was in the middle of building something that consumed all her space and most of her humanity and seemed, at the time, like the only thing that mattered. She'd had to arrive at 30 to understand that the things worth having didn't announce themselves. They accumulated. They required patience of a kind she hadn't known she was capable of. Meridian Capital's quarterly report came out in the 2nd week of April, and it was the best one in 3 years, which Marcus relayed with the specific satisfaction of someone who had held things together during a difficult stretch and wanted it acknowledged without having to ask. The board wants you in New York for the strategy session, he said. End of May. I'll be there. There's also the Hartfield acquisition we've been watching. If we're going to move, it needs to be before summer. Walk me through the structure this week, and I'll have thoughts by Friday. You want to do this on the phone, or should I? Phone is fine, Marcus. I'll be in Maine. A pause. Permanently? She thought about the word. It was a reasonable question, and 3 months ago she wouldn't have known how to answer it. I'm building something here, she said. Meridian doesn't need me in the building every day. It needs me making the right calls, which I can do from anywhere. That's a change. I know it is. Another pause. For what it's worth, the decisions you've made this year from up there have been some of the best you've ever made. You already said something like that. You didn't disagree then either. She smiled at the lake through her kitchen window. I'll talk to you Friday. She'd been thinking about Meridian differently since January, since the board meeting and the vote and the drive back up the coast with the radio off. She hadn't reduced her standards or her ambitions or the particular demanding quality she brought to every decision, but she'd stopped mistaking the company for the point. The company was what she did. It was not what she was. That distinction had been blurry for so long that separating them felt sometimes like untangling something that had grown together, two plants too close, roots intertwined. The work still mattered. She wasn't someone who could let it stop mattering. She'd tried the version of that in the first 2 weeks at Harlow's Cove, and the only thing she'd proven was that her mind needed problems to work on, and she might as well choose good ones. But the work had taken its rightful size, which was large but not total, and the space around it had turned out to contain things she hadn't known she was missing because she'd never stopped moving long enough to notice the absence. Trust, for one. Real trust. Not the contract kind, not the carefully managed professional kind, but the kind that accrued between people who had seen each other clearly in difficult circumstances and not flinched. Ryan had trusted her with the most irreplaceable thing in his life before he had any logical reason to. Lily had decided, with the unclouded instinct of a child who had already learned what it costs to trust the wrong people, that Vanessa was worth trusting. And Vanessa had trusted, gradually, and not without resistance, that the quiet of this town and the plainness of these people and the smallness of the daily routine were not a retreat from her real life, but an expansion of it. She was 30 years old. She had more money than she would ever need, and a company that ran competently in her absence and a professional reputation that had survived everything thrown at it. None of those things had made her feel, until recently, like anything was actually secure. The security had come from other sources. Smaller ones. A fixed fence post and a Tuesday night dinner, and a child who argued about salt, and an almost smile from a man who didn't perform. She thought about her 23-year-old self sometimes, the version who had walked into her first investor meeting with borrowed confidence and a pitch deck and the specific terror of someone who could not afford to fail. That version would have looked at this life and not understood it, would have called the lake house a stopover and counted the days until she could get back to the office. She didn't feel superior to that earlier self. She understood her. That version had done what was necessary to become this version, and that this version would not exist without her. But she wouldn't go back. She didn't want the life where everything was the company, and the company was everything, and the success was real. But somehow always hovering one quarter away from meaning what she'd told herself it would mean when she finally had enough of it. Enough wasn't a number. She'd known that intellectually for years. She understood it now in a way that had weight. In late April, on a Saturday afternoon when the lake was doing something extraordinary with the light, and Lily was in the garden with her hands in the dirt, and Ryan was somewhere inside with a broken cabinet door that had bothered him for 3 weeks, Vanessa sat on the back porch of the blue-shuttered house with coffee she was actually drinking while it was hot, and a paperback she was actually reading rather than holding as a prop, and she felt the particular quality of a moment that knew what it was. Not perfect. The coffee was slightly overbrewed. Her phone had buzzed twice with things that needed her attention and would continue to need it. There was a conversation she and Ryan still needed to have about what the next year looked like in practical terms, and that conversation had several moving parts and would require the kind of honesty that was easy to describe and harder to sustain. Lily had discovered that morning that the 4th bean plant was, in fact, dead, and had spent 10 minutes being more upset about it than she'd intended to be, which was the way losses worked when you were 8 and also when you were 30, and the losses were different, but the mechanism was the same. None of that was resolved. None of it was clean. But Ryan came out of the back door at some point with 2 mugs and sat in the other chair without asking if she wanted company, which was his way, which she had learned to love specifically for its directness. And Lily called something from the garden that neither of them fully caught, and Ryan called back a question, and Lily answered with the detailed and slightly indignant account of what she'd found in the soil, and he listened and responded, and the whole exchange had the rhythm of something that had been going on a long time, because it had. 4 seasons, more or less, counting from the morning she'd walked the lake path and found a man crouched at the water's edge, looking at something in the reeds. 4 seasons of proximity, and then distance, and then proximity again, of fixing things and making things and talking about some things and leaving other things alone in the right way. "She's going to ask for another packet of seeds," Ryan said when Lily went back to her digging. "The bean replacements? And probably something else. She's been looking at a seed catalog at dinner." "I've seen the catalog." "She's got it bookmarked." Vanessa looked at the garden. At Lily's back, bent over her work, focused and unhurried, her hands in the dirt without any particular concern for what they looked like or whether it was convenient. "Let her get what she wants," she said. "The garden's a good thing for her." "I know." He drank his coffee. "You're going to pay for whatever she picks." "I know I am." He turned his head to look at her. Not the brief assessment, the longer one, the kind he'd started using since he came back, the kind with more in it than information gathering. "You don't have to do that," he said. "I know I don't." "I'm not... Ryan." She looked back at him. "I want to. That's different." He held her eyes for a moment, then he turned back to the lake. "Okay," he said. "You keep saying okay. Because you keep saying things that are okay." She looked at her coffee. She looked at the lake. She looked at the garden where Lily was conducting what appeared to be a formal inventory of her remaining plants, counting under her breath with the focused authority of someone who took the work seriously. There was a version of her life that had no room for this. She'd lived it for 7 years. She knew its shape. The early mornings and the late nights and the quarterly reports and the board meetings and the constant forward motion that left no space to look sideways. That version had built real things. She didn't regret it, but she understood now what it had cost, and the cost had been specific. It had cost her the knowledge of what it felt like to be somewhere that wanted her back. That was the thing no one had told her about ambition, or maybe everyone had told her and she hadn't been able to hear it yet. That you could build the life you aimed at and arrive at the top of it and find it was smaller than the aim. That the filling in happened sideways, in the spaces between the goals, in the relationships you had time for when you weren't at terminal velocity. That the thing that made a life feel like a life was not the size of what you accomplished, but the quality of what you returned to. She was 30 years old, and she was sitting on a porch in Maine with a man who didn't perform, and a child who didn't defer, and coffee that was getting cold again, and she was, for the first time since she could remember, not waiting for anything. Ryan had one final contractor obligation, a 3-day debrief in Washington that he'd had scheduled since before he left. Procedural and unavoidable, the closing of a file. He flew out on a Wednesday and was back by Saturday, and this time when he left, Lily did not carry herself with the same careful composure. She was 9 months older than the girl who had stood on the porch in the rain and said, "Come back." And 9 months was not long in most reckonings, but it was long when you were 8 turning 9 and things had changed around you in ways that turned out to be permanent. She spent the 3 days at Vanessa's house with the ease of long familiarity, at the kitchen table doing homework and on the porch reading and sleeping in what was, without discussion, her room. The guest room that had her stuffed animals on the shelf, unpacked, arranged with consideration, belonging to a place. On the last evening before Ryan came home, Lily put down her book and looked at Vanessa across the dinner table with the particular focused attention she brought to things she'd been thinking about for a while. "Are you going to stay?" she asked. "Not just this year, I mean..." She pressed her lips together briefly, arranging the words. "I mean, with us, in the actual sustained way." Vanessa looked at her. "Yes. Because you want to. Not because of Dad or because of me individually. Because of all of it," Vanessa said, "including you individually." Lily looked at her plate, then back up. "I don't call people Mom," she said carefully. "I want you to know I'm not going to do that. I'm not asking you to. But you're also not..." She stopped again, started over. "You're not just the neighbor anymore." "No," Vanessa agreed. "I'm not." "I don't know what word to use," Lily said with a rare and honest frustration, "for what you are." Vanessa sat with that for a moment. She thought about all the words available, the official ones, the sentimental ones, the ones that would fit the outside of the situation without fitting the inside of it. None of them were quite right. None of them captured the specific accumulation of months, the midnight visits and the math worksheets and the soup and the porch, and the thing Lily had said one evening that she didn't know Vanessa had held on to since, "Because it's you." "Maybe we don't need a word for it yet," Vanessa said. "Maybe we just know what it is and call it that." Lily turned this over, visibly. That's actually reasonable, she said, with the tone of someone who hadn't expected it to be. I have my moments. You have quite a few moments, Lily said. More than you think. They finished dinner. They did the dishes together in the manner they'd established over months. Lily washed, Vanessa dried, the radio on low because Lily liked background sound while she worked, and Vanessa had stopped minding it sometime in November. They argued briefly about whether the pasta pot needed another pass with the sponge. Lily won. They put everything away in the specific places it went, which Vanessa now knew by reflex. When they were done, Lily stood in the kitchen and looked at her for a moment with the clear, patient eyes. I'm glad the fence was leaning, she said. Vanessa looked at her. What? When we first moved here, the fence between the yards. She gestured vaguely in its direction. It was leaning and Dad fixed it, and then he met you. I'm glad it was leaning. Vanessa stood in the kitchen and looked at this 9-year-old. This specific, serious, occasionally infuriating, entirely remarkable 9-year-old, and felt the thing she'd been feeling for months without having a name for it. She had a name for it now. She'd had it for a while. She just hadn't said it out loud yet. Go to bed, she said. Your dad's home early tomorrow. Lily went. She turned at the hallway. Vanessa. Yeah. You're good at this. She said it simply, the way she said everything true. In case no one's told you. She went to her room. Vanessa stood in the kitchen and held the dish towel and looked at the wall. No one had told her, or maybe people had, in the roundabout professional ways that counted accomplishments and titles and share prices and board votes, and she'd kept score of all of it and found it, in the final reckoning, not quite sufficient. This was sufficient. Ryan came back the next morning, Saturday, while the light was still new and the lake was blue in the specific way it was blue in May, full of itself, certain, the gray and the ice long gone. He came through the back door without knocking because the back door had been unlocked for 6 months, and knocking had stopped making sense somewhere around February. Lily came out of her room and crossed the kitchen, and he caught her in the hug the way he always caught her, fully, without reservation, the one place his body didn't hold anything back. She said something into his shoulder that Vanessa couldn't hear. He answered, his hand on the back of her head. Then Lily pulled back and went to get breakfast with the efficiency of a person whose morning had items, and Ryan looked at Vanessa across the kitchen with the morning light coming through the window at a low angle, and neither of them said anything for a moment. Then he put his bag down, crossed to the counter, and started the coffee. How was she? He asked. Good. She won an argument about the pasta pot. She always wins that one. I know. I let her win. She knows you let her win. I know she does. We have an understanding. He turned from the counter and looked at her, and the morning light was doing something to his face that was simply the morning light, not a metaphor, just the way he looked in the kitchen of his own house on a Saturday, with his daughter making noise in the other room and the coffee starting to brew, and Vanessa Sterling standing 3 feet away like she'd always been there. Thank you, he said. Stop thanking me, she said. It's starting to sound like you think I'm doing you a favor. Aren't you? No, she said. I'm doing something I want to do. Those aren't the same thing. He held her eyes. No, he agreed. They're not. Lily came back into the kitchen with a box of cereal and the seed catalog, which she placed on the table with the subtle definitiveness of someone introducing a topic. I have a proposal, she said. Of course you do, Ryan said. There are 6 more things I want to plant. I've done the research. She opened the catalog to a page that had been folded at the corner. Vanessa said you'd say it's too many. I didn't say that, Vanessa said. You implied it. I asked a clarifying question. With your skeptical voice, Ryan looked at Vanessa. Vanessa looked at Ryan. Something passed between them that had the quality of a shared language, the kind that develops between people who have been paying attention to each other long enough to have shorthand. Show me what you've got, Ryan said, sitting down at the table. Lily spread the catalog open and began her case, methodical and specific. And Ryan listened with the full attention he gave everything, and Vanessa got the cereal bowls from the cabinet where they lived and poured coffee and brought Ryan his mug and sat down at the table that she had come to without planning it and stayed at because it turned out to be the place she'd been trying to find without knowing it had a specific address. Outside, the lake was blue, and the garden was waking up, and the spring was doing what spring did. Not perfectly, not all at once, but steadily, the way things that intend to last tend to move. Unhurried, sure of themselves, taking the space they needed without apology. The three of them sat at the kitchen table in the morning light and argued about seeds. It was, Vanessa thought, exactly enough.